Biztech's Ambassador Conversation Show. South Africa, located at the southern tip of Africa, is a diverse nation with a complex history. It's known for stunning landscapes, a multicultural society, and its journey from apartheid to democracy in 1994. Now, with a rich blend of cultures, languages, and a very large economy, South Africa is a compelling country with a lot to explore and understand, but actually is not very well understood in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, to enlighten us about South Africa, we have with us the South African Ambassador to Malaysia, His Excellency Dave Malcomson. Welcome back to Biztech Asia, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Brian, and good morning. It's a pleasure to be back with you on Biztech Asia. I think we last spoke about 18 months ago, so it really is a pleasure to see you again, and thank you for the opportunity of engaging with you.
Now, Dave, for a start, can you give us an overview of the South African economy today and how it has changed since our last conversation 18 months ago?
Yes, no, thank you. And thank you for your introduction. I think you've encapsulated much of what South Africa is all about in your introduction. But essentially, the economy is very much like Malaysia's economy in the sense of the size of the economy. Our GDP currently is about $407 billion, which places us about 33rd in the overall list of countries by GDP. And I think that's pretty much where Malaysia sits as well, in terms of both the size of the GDP and your location in the listing of country GDPs. Of course, we've got double the population of Malaysia. So in the GDP per capita, you then have a GDP per capita that's double ours. But I think just like Malaysia as well, the thing that distinguishes South Africa, particularly in the African continent, is that we do have the most diversified, industrialized, and technologically advanced economy in Africa. And for example, there's about 180 of the Fortune 500 companies that have chosen to headquarter themselves in South Africa. We have a very sophisticated business community. I believe you soon will be interviewing some of those South African companies, a company like Sasol that developed the coal to fuel technology, a company like Naspers, which was the first to break into the communications industry in China, a company like MTN that has huge stakes in the telecommunications industry across Africa. We also have a very advanced financial and fintech ecosystem and an ecosystem for innovation. And the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is the biggest stock exchange in Africa. And I believe, again, down the line, you're going to be interviewing the head of the JSE, the CEO of the JSE, who can give you more detail about that. But as an illustration of the diversification of our economy, I'll just give you some of the facts and figures around the structure of the economy, where something in the order of 23% is finance, real estate, and business services, 16% is personal services, 13.4% is manufacturing, and 13.5% is catering and accommodation. So you can see from that it is a diversified economy. Having said that, we still occupy a very preeminent stake in the world of raw materials, where we have an overwhelming majority of the platinum metal groups. We have big stakes in various other metals that are important in the modern economy. And as we turn towards renewable energy, things like vanadium, manganese, chrome, and then the more traditional things of coal, iron, diamonds, and gold. So we have a mixture of the sort of more traditional minerals, but also the minerals that are going to be very important in renewable energy and in the communications technology industries going forward. So that gives you a sense of the diversity and the spectrum of what we do as an economy. I think in terms of your question about what's new, the growth rate last year wasn't all that great. It was 2%, but that is still positive. And we are seeing the green shoots of recovery when we look at the growing employment figures. We have created new jobs. Very significantly, the president set a target over 5 years of 1.2 trillion rand in generated new investment. And at the 5th investment conference earlier in the year, we met that target of 1.2 trillion rand and actually surpassed it. We ended up with about 1.5 trillion rand, not just pledged, because we've tracked over the first 4 years what's happened to the investments. and many of them have actually been implemented or are being implemented. So that's about $80 billion of new money that's coming into the economy that again is helping with the recovery and the resilience of the economy. In terms of what's changed between us and Malaysia, when we last spoke, I talked about our focus on providing Malaysia with diversified supply chains, with other options in terms of the food sector. And I'm happy to report that last year we doubled the trade between Malaysia and South Africa. And that was particularly in the food sector. We got an 87% increase in the export of processed foods to Malaysia. So I think that was very encouraging to see. And of course, we still occupy, I think, about 20% of the market share of the fruit that you're importing into Malaysia. The one area we still have a challenge is the meat industry. We've just announced big deals with Indonesia and Saudi Arabia, for example, to provide halal meat. But we still have about 6 or 7 abattoirs from South Africa backed up in the process of trying to get access to the Malaysian market. So I think in this day and age where we need diversified supply chains for food, and we see the Ukraine conflict impacting in terms of food prices and rising inflation, it's important that perhaps Malaysia look at South Africa as an alternative source of protein that is of same or better quality at a competitive price. So I think that's one area where we can see some progress going forward. In the actual basket of the export goods, the Malaysian exports to South Africa remain largely based on palm oil and petroleum products. But the South African exports to Malaysia, there are some new items that have been creeping into the export basket. I think because of the quarantine from Indonesia on exporting coal, we now see coal as quite a significant export to Malaysia, on top of the traditional big part of the basket, which is manganese to Malaysia. And then, of course, as I said, the fruit and the processed foods and so on, they still climb exponentially. But I see also in terms of the pickup of the Malaysian construction industry, there are things like rolled steel and aluminium, which are now becoming a more significant part of what we're exporting to Malaysia, as well as some other minerals that we didn't necessarily see there in the recent past, such as vanadium and cobalt and so on. So I think the export basket is growing and it is getting more diversified, which is very encouraging. But as I say, I think the one area where we can perhaps look for some more progress is perhaps in the meat exports to Malaysia. So I think, long story short, there has definitely been progress, both in the South African economy and in our relations with Malaysia. Of course, you may well know we do have our challenges, particularly in the energy sector, but with every challenge comes opportunities. So, for example, when I was at the investment conference earlier in the year, many of the new investments were in the renewable energy sector. And there are solutions that are being found for the provision of renewable energy, particularly at municipal level and at business level. For example, some of the mining groups are putting online their own energy supplies using renewable energy. So,
and that has been and I want to jump in here, because that has been South Africa's big Achilles heel. And that has prevented a lot of large-scale investments from going into South Africa, because really that lack of stability of power production. You can't run a data center, for example, without stable and high amounts of power.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I think both from the government side, of course, there's the initiatives that we've been undertaking to stabilize the energy supply. For example, the president has appointed a minister in his cabinet whose only mandate and portfolio is to deal with electricity supply, generation and supply. So we've seen some definite stabilization in the energy grid. But as I say, there's other initiatives, both at the private sector level and in partnership with government, to bring independent power producers onto the grid and to provide solutions. One solution area perhaps is in hydrogen fuel cell technology, in green hydrogen. And I know when my Minister of Public Enterprises was here a couple of months ago and had some discussions with Tenaga, that's maybe an area of cooperation, because Malaysia equally has made announcements recently about getting more involved in the green energy sector, particularly hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cell technology and so on. So I think, again, there's those opportunities that get generated by challenges.
Now, Dave, one of the things that's happened also in the last 18 months is the geopolitical landscape has shifted tremendously. You mentioned the Ukraine just now, and really the weaponization of the US dollar has really shifted the trade conversations globally around de-dollarization and trade away from Western domination. Help us understand in Asia how Africa, and not just a South African perspective, really is looking at these shifting geopolitical sands.
No, I think that's a very good point. During the recent BRICS summit in South Africa, President Ramaphosa, definitely picked up on this point. And to quote him, he talked about the global financial and payment systems that are increasingly being used as instruments of geopolitical contestation. So as you say, I think that's where this whole debate about de-dollarization emerged from. Look, it's not something that's particularly new. Unilateral sanctions and so on have been used for some time against countries like Iran and Cuba. But I think the way the international financial systems and the payment systems and the dollar have been utilized as a weapon in the Ukraine conflict has really focused people's minds. The two areas that I'd just like to say that are slightly incorrect when it comes to the media debates around this is that BRICS itself was never talking about de-dollarization, and nor were we necessarily talking about creating a BRICS currency. And secondly, it's not so much that we want to have something in opposition to the West or to contest with the West. All that we're saying is we now need to explore alternatives and to have choices. So to that end, we have this debate that's been generated about using national currencies and alternative financial and payment systems in the realms of trade and investment. And again, it's not necessarily an idea that's very new. The USSR and India at that time used to trade in rubles and rupees. So this is something that has been done in the past, but of course it's something that's now being taken forward much more vigorously. So as South Africa and as BRICS, we've been exploring using our own national currencies when it comes to payments for trade items and also for investment. So for example, in the BRICS New Development Bank, instead of doing loans in dollars, which often lead to the greatest costs in a long-term investment project, we've been launching bonds at national level in each of the 5 BRICS countries, and then using national currencies to pay for the loans or to back up the loan. So you then remove the danger of currency fluctuations and a dependence on the dollar. So
yeah,
again,
and also, and I want to, just as an independent observer, jump in here and really frame the conversation around de-risking these projects. Because when you start financing it locally with local bonds, with local currencies, where the local spend is, that whole project is completely de-risked from a currency perspective. And we have seen many countries in practice, whether it's Brazil, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Argentina, simply because a viable project was financed in US dollars.
Absolutely. And when the BRICS Development Bank was first created, the first president of the bank did some research and found out that the greatest cost of financing a long-term infrastructure project lies in the fact that it's dollar-based. So if you can remove that risk, you immediately are removing some of the expanding costs of an infrastructure project. And equally, if you are controlling the payment of trade between 2 countries in your own national currencies, again, you are de-risking, both strategically and practically. So I think that these are very welcome trends and movements that have been going on. And I've noticed even Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has been talking about the use of national currencies in trade and investment when it comes to the ASEAN region. So I think that this is an idea whose time has come, and it's something that's actually being implemented now. But as I say, it's not something we're consciously doing as an anti-anything. It's not directed at being anti-Western or so on. So we've always said as South Africa that we're not being forced into binary choices. Just because we have a focus on the global South and on BRICS does not mean we necessarily are turning away from our relationship with the European Union, with the US, and countries like Japan, because those countries are still vitally important to us in terms of trade volumes, in terms of investment that creates jobs and so on. So we believe we can be non-aligned and have relations with both countries of the West and countries of the South.
Now, Dave, how will all these impact South Africa? Because after all, from a trade perspective, South Africa has an overall trade deficit with the BRICS countries. Just with China alone, you have a 10.9 billion trade deficit.
Yes, I mean, that is a problem that we've been talking to the Chinese about for some time. And to be fair, the Chinese have been very responsive to our problems with the trade imbalance. And even within the Chinese system itself, there was a time where the Economic Commission in China realized that long-term trade imbalances are not in the interests of China. So they've been working with us and with other African countries through the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation to see how to ramp up particularly the value addition of the trade basket between us. Because traditionally we export raw materials and then we import finished products which cost a lot more. So, for example, we've been saying to the Chinese, rather than just exporting your solar panels, your solar heaters to South Africa, come and invest in the manufacturing facility in South Africa, which they were doing. But then we discovered, for example, that the tubing was still being imported from China, and then the assembling was taking place at the factory. So we said to them, listen, help us rebuild our silica industry by actually manufacturing the glass tubing in South Africa. And that they've been amenable to. One other example is at some point, the imports of Chinese textiles and clothing were decimating the South African textiles and clothing industry. So China unilaterally agreed to a moratorium on the volumes of textiles and clothing that they were exporting to South Africa. Unfortunately, in that period of moratorium, other countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh took advantage of that gap in the market. But what I'm saying is the Chinese showed through that action that they're very aware of the need to try and balance the trade. So, for example, we've been able to negotiate all the protocols that are needed to access the Chinese market for agro-processed foods, for things like meat and various types of fruits. And then, as I say, we've been trying to get them to do the investment in manufacturing in South Africa so that we can go up the value addition and beneficiation chain.
And so China is obviously as your largest trading partner, and also this year, the 25th anniversary of diplomatic relations between both your countries, obviously is trying to rebalance the trade differential. But where are the opportunities then for Malaysian companies, as well as companies in the broader Asia Pacific region, to invest in South Africa?
Yeah. Now, that's a very good question. It's something that's been exercising my mind, of course, while I've been here. I think primarily we need to get back to having a strategic focus on each other, because often in Asia, business follows politics. So if the messaging around how important a partner is widely disseminated and understood by the business community, that's often where you find the trade and other opportunities that are being followed by business. So, for example, in the 1990s, when it was the time of Dr. Mahathir and we had President Mandela and then President Mbeki, there was a very close political relationship where from the Malaysian side, there was a focus on South-South cooperation, on Africa, and through initiatives such as the Langkawi Dialogue. And as a result of that, Malaysia became a huge investor in South Africa. And there was a lot of trade that was climbing exponentially between the countries. Unfortunately, after Tun left in 2003, there's kind of been just a flatlining of the relationship. And over the years, we've kind of lost the strategic focus on each other that's necessary to make sure that the business focus is maintained. So the primary task has been to regain the strategic focus. And I think in that, we have an ally in Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. He is an internationalist by nature. Of course, he's had to focus domestically to stabilize his administration and to make sure that domestically all the things are in place that are needed to be in place. But I have it on good authority, and having spoken to him at various events, that he does want to refocus on Africa. And he has spoken to the Foreign Ministry about looking at Africa again and seeing how we can generate South-South cooperation, and particularly Africa-Malaysia cooperation, Africa-ASEAN cooperation, and looking at the South African relationship. He has indicated that he's very keen to establish a more direct relationship with President Ramaphosa, and to have the relationship with South Africa revitalized. And this year is the 30th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. And when we met as the Foreign Office consultation in March, there was a formal agreement between the two sides that we now need to revitalize the relationship and take measures going forward that will make sure that we get back to what it was in the 1990s, early 2000s. And I think from that, you then can start opening up the business opportunities again. And once the focus is back, then you will start seeing the opportunities being translated into concrete advantages for Malaysian business. For example, in Africa now, we are integrated and united under the African Continental Free Trade Area. And that provides a market of 1.2 to 1.3 billion people, of whom about 500 to 600 million are Muslims. So what we've been saying to Malaysia is, come and invest in South Africa. Since the Ukraine conflict, of course, there's been a big problem with finding containers, finding affordable shipping, and so on and so forth. And the supply chains have been problematic. So rather come and invest in industrial parks in South Africa for your semiconductors and whatever else you're manufacturing. And with that, you can supply both the South African market, but more importantly, using the South African infrastructure linkages, the South African retail linkages in the continent, our banking linkages, you can then reach this huge market as Malaysia. And I think that provides mutually beneficial opportunities there for Malaysian and South African business working together in South Africa, using South Africa as a gateway to Africa, just as we regard Malaysia as a gateway to ASEAN. You then can have South Africa as a halal hub and as a hub for the manufacturing of some of your other products into the African market.
Dave, it's been a great conversation. And I think we've really got a sense now of some of the challenges and also some of the opportunities that are present between not only South Africa, but also the Malaysia and the rest of Asia. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, I think, the big debates that have been carried in the media recently revolved around the BRICS summit and what that means for the global South. I think the interest in joining BRICS from other countries in the South has indicated that there's a willingness, a hunger for alternatives, for choices in the international arena. I think there's a feeling that the international arena, as it's currently constituted, doesn't provide the representativity, the inclusivity, and the equality that countries in the South are looking for. And again, it's not that we're looking for some anti-Western paradigm. What we're looking for is a group of countries that can truly be the voice of the emerging South, of the global South. And through that, you have a common set of concerns and needs, you have a common historical experience, you have a common, you want to make sure that the multilateral system is an inclusive system and that it leads to mutually beneficial development and growth, that sustainable development is across the board rather than just in a few select areas. So the fact that there has been now the expansion of BRICS, which provides you with the economies of scale. I think the new BRICS membership now provides a base where you have 37% of the world GDP, you have almost 50% of the world's population and 21% share of the world's trade. You now have a grouping that has some weight behind it, that can be taken seriously in international fora. When there are discussions, for example, in the WTO, in the G20, at the UN, you have a grouping now that's coming with a common voice on some key issues around climate, around the international governance architecture, around how the UN itself should function, around how the IMF and the World Bank should function. And they're also providing some alternative solutions. I mean, in Africa, we talk about African solutions for African problems, but that can be extended to say that global South solutions for global problems. Because make no mistake, many of these problems are global problems. They can't be solved by any one region, any one country. We need to be all working together in the international community. So once you have this, this grouping coming together that provide you with a credible voice, you can start making some headway in how you deal with some of these global challenges that then drill down to being beneficial at the national and regional levels.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thank you very much, Brian. Lovely to see you again.
Now, we've been speaking to His Excellency Dave Malcomson, the Ambassador of South Africa to Malaysia. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to Biztech's Ambassador Conversation Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.